recently, and we were talking about the conferences and going back and doing things. And I said, well, it's fine, and I'm happy to do all these things, but the problem is, it's not. I'm on the other side of the ocean. I'm in a different zone. It's not like taking a flight down or driving down somewhere. I've got to basically leave my part of the world and spend a few weeks there to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one of those things. For the last few years, I've had one foot in the United States. There's another in Europe. There's another in Australia. But London seems to be the hub of it for now, anyway.
Yeah, you don't have many Bigfoots there, do you?
Well, we do have reports. We do have lots of reports, which is very strange. It's strange that we should have them. I did a whole section on it in my book, Piece of Britain, and I was astounded to see how many people claimed, at least, to have seen something man-like and hairy roaming the British Isles.
Yeah, my wife is from there.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, Yorkshire. Sheffield. Oh, Sheffield. Sorry.
Oh, really?
Yorkshire lass. What? Yorkshire lass?
She's a Yorkshire lass. She's a Yorkshire girl. That's
what she's saying.
yeah, I get it. I understand. I grew up in Wales. I don't sound very Welsh. Probably not to your wife, anyway. And
a little bit, she said.
A little bit. From an Irish and English family crossover. So as far as the Welsh are concerned, you don't get to join, no matter how many hundreds of years you do. You never get to be Welsh. That's their sort of thing, So I think the British were all a bit of a mix, a hodgepodge of even ethnic Brits. We're all a mix of something along the line somewhere. Some Celts, some Viking, some Saxon, and so on and so forth. Like I wanted to talk to you for a long time. We were neighbors. I remember at the CryptidCon 2018, I believe.
Yes, I was talking to my wife about that, and I was trying to remember where it was that we met. But yeah, you're right, CryptidCon.
That was it. And I was just, well, first of all, I've got one of your lovely T-shirts I've kept to this day. It's still done that from time to time. I was really astounded at that time, anyway, to find all these different reports in the United States outside of, the Pacific Northwest, that classic area where we expect Bigfoot should be. I was thinking to myself, well, how could this be? How are there Bigfoots elsewhere? And of course, Kentucky is this very vast area with lots of wilderness. So I thought I'd just get a bit of a debrief from you on the kind of work that you guys are doing there and some of the sightings that you're encountering.
Sure. Do you want me to start now or
I'm recording. Sorry,
okay.
Charlie. Yeah, I just go straight in. There's no intro, no editing. It is, it's essentially, it's how do I put it? It's a like an exercise in nepotism. Just talking, just chatting, shooting the breeze.
Yeah.
People like mind.
It's better that way, just to be relaxed.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm no expert. I'm educated. I've been doing research for over 3 decades, taking eyewitness reports and going out in the field almost weekly, almost every weekend I go out. So I'm just basing a lot of this knowledge on what I think Bigfoot is and how it came about and why it's in Kentucky. And one thing I talk to people about is, a lot of animals came from Asia across the Bering Strait land bridge, when all the continents were connected, and they dispersed across North America. And now they're kind of landlocked in Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia. And we have, thousands of reports on this side of the United States. So, Bigfoot is a living, breathing, reproducing hominid like ourselves that's adapted over thousands of years to elude us, to avoid us. And I like to say they have a high environmental IQ. So, they're the ninjas of the forest. When we get out of our vehicle, they know we're there. You're not going to sneak up on them with camo and flashlights and even hunting dogs. They're too smart. So I think when we approach this, we go out and we just act like happy-go-lucky campers and hikers, play music, sing songs, laugh, and they're curious, and that's their biggest weakness. They want to know what we're doing in their living room, so they'll come in and check us out, and as long as we're non-threatening, having a good time, we sometimes have great interactions with them.
And how do you? Is there some way that, because I know you sometimes organize large groups as well as part of that natural environment, I suppose, presenting that curious spectacle. How do you go about monitoring the area, or trying to capture peripheral evidence of these creatures possibly coming in?
The easiest way is through vocalizations, because you could capture vocals from hundreds of yards away, and they don't have to be real close to do that. So a good digital recorder with an omnidirectional mic, or mics which pick up any direction, works really well. Yes, you can use a parabolic, but you've got to point that in the right direction.
Yeah.
But the vocals are the easiest to catch. It's hard to catch a glimpse of one. Tracks are even hard to come by. So vocals seem to be the easiest way to communicate or record some of their behavior.
That makes sense. And as to as far as getting camera footage or FLIR footage of these creatures, do you normally have the camp staked out?
No. What we'll do is we'll keep a thermal imager with us, because it picks up heat, and we don't believe they can detect that. A lot of us believe they do pick up the IR from a night vision. And I'll give you an example. I had third generation military issued night vision once, and my buddy had a cheap pair, and I can see his IR beam going through the woods with my night vision. It looked like a flashlight.
That makes so much sense.
And if they've adapted and they're, they can see at night, probably, maybe they can see that IR beam. And that's another reason they stay away from game cameras. Because if a game camera is constantly shooting off an IR beam and they see it, they're not going to go over there. So we kind of use thermals, and when we think one's close, we'll break it out and start scanning the area. Sometimes we capture glimpses of some. We caught some in Tennessee once of two juvies, or juveniles, belly crawling, which a lot of us believe the younger ones go down to all fours quite often, more than the adults. It's a long story, but I think we jumped two on top of this mountain, and we turned and videotaped what looks like two hominids belly crawling. I mean, you can see arm over arm. You can see the rear end, the face. There was no muzzle, so it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer. It was a round head. So that's one thing you got to look for, to rule out bear, coyote, deer, is you look for a snout. And if you don't see a snout, that's a good indication it's a person or a Bigfoot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that's fascinating to me what you said about the IR being seen. I mean, that's very, very interesting, and it makes so much sense when you think about it. And I've had this idea for a long time of essentially switching back to analog cameras in some description, and linking them up to and little tripwires and traps and the rest of that stuff is not an original idea. I'm sure other people have tried it, but to gain more success in that respect, because I've always suspected that they can see these cameras. Now, my old view used to be, well, the forest is kind of like their living room. So if somebody comes into your living room and moves a couple of books around, you're going to notice that. Whereas to everybody else, it doesn't know your house. It just looks like a couple of books. And that's maybe how it is to them too. Maybe that's true. But could this game cam, issue with the IRB be the real clincher? Is that perhaps the real missing detail here of why we're failing to capture them?
Yeah, and that's a great idea, because I have a gentleman in Kentucky that captured 5 photos on a game camera, amazing photos. And his game camera was one of the old ones that used just a flash.
Okay.
So maybe you're right. Just go back to the old school game cameras.
Something about that. I mean, could it be a get out of jail free card, possibly, to explain why we can't capture them?
Yeah.
There's always that issue, And what do you think about this convergence of dogman sightings? And I understand there are some in Kentucky as well, and Bigfoot sightings. Do they occur in similar areas, or is there a territorial separation between them? Or what are your findings in regards to that?
I've got them here in Kentucky, and they're in the same areas. And what's interesting about that is, I'll give you one example. There's a dogman report I took years ago, and the story goes, she was a senior in high school, and she was living at her home with her parents, and her boyfriend was living with them. And prior to her sighting, the mother had dozens of cats, that would roam around the property, and they all went missing within a couple weeks.
Wow.
And one evening they're watching a movie, and they heard a cat scream in the backyard, and something hit the back of the house. So he got up and looked out the back door with a flashlight, and he saw 2 large eyes, like almost 8 inches apart, giant, that yellow glowing eyes that you get a lot, above a stump. And he told his girlfriend, "Come here, look at this." And she came out, and it ducked down. So he took his hand, he hit the side of the house, and it popped up again. And he said it did it multiple times. And when he told me this, he mentioned the stump. When I got out there, the stump was 5 feet tall.
Wow.
It wasn't a short stump, it was a large stump. So that happened about a week or 2 before she saw it. She's going to school in the morning. It was still kind of dark out. She had a security light on her house that shone down the dirt driveway. And she's walking to the school bus, which is through the woods, basically, because this is Kentucky and a lot of people live out in the woods. And she's walking down this dirt driveway, and she hears a commotion on the right. So she stops, and this hairy bipedal creature comes out of the forest onto the driveway. And when it did, she let out a gasp, like, and it turned and looked at her, and it snarled. And she said it had a muzzle, it had pointed ears, the legs looked bent backwards, looked like a man that worked out a lot, but covered in hair. And she just froze. And then the creature sprang off the driveway, and she could hear it running away. And when she couldn't hear it any longer, she ran to the bus stop. She got to school, told her boyfriend what had happened, and she drew a sketch of it, which I love, because it's important for a witness to document everything immediately. And so she just drew a sketch of it. And what's interesting, she sent me the sketch. The sketch doesn't really look like a dog man. The muzzle was not that pronounced. It was shorter. The ears were on the side of the head, a little pointed, but not on top. Like a lot of dog men, the ears are on top. The legs didn't look bent backwards in her sketch. It looked it looked almost like a Bigfoot.
Huh.
So I'm wondering if some of these are misidentifications, because some Bigfoots have that prognathism like a chimp.
Mm.
So they have that little extension of the jaw.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we don't see the ears on a Bigfoot, but maybe in this case she did see the ear on the side of the head. So I thought it's interesting that sometimes Dogman Bigfoot could be one and the same in some cases.
Mm. I've wondered about that for a while. Is it a different, at least the ones that have humanoid form, not with the legs bent backwards, for example, if it is a variation on the species? I know people like Lauren Coleman have written in their books about perhaps some of the Dogman stories being related to a giant monkey type species like you get in Asia and South America, or the salvaje or Snatchy or the Cardan in the Himalayas, which is a tailed monkey that's supposed to be 5 or 6 feet tall that occasionally attacks people. And could we, especially their baboon-like features, looking at these creatures, especially in old Europe and where all these werewolf legends come from, have mistaken these creatures for a dog-like creature, instead of a primate? Or again, another get out of jail free card, Charlie. But
Yeah.
I often wonder about this. Oh, is it just a different type of Bigfoot? Now, recently I've been thinking a lot about different types of descriptions of hairy hominids around the world. You've got that European woodwoes or almasti type, which seems to be more Neanderthal-like, and that Manape type in North America, which is a lot stockier and larger, and as well as the Yeti and others. And do you see something like that there in the US? Let's perhaps exclude the Dogman, which could be a different thing for now. Do you have Bigfoot reports, like you say, with that have more of a prognathous a sort of type of muzzle, or a larger frame, or a more man-like appearance? Is there a variation in the encounters and sightings that are described to you?
I will tell you from my own experience, and I mentioned this in my presentations. I've documented over 400 reports
Wow.
and over 3 decades. I have quite a few that are close encounters, that are daytime close encounters, where the witness gets a really good look at the face. And every one of them, the witness describes a wide hooded nose, a nose like ours, but flatter and hooded, not like a gorilla.
Yeah.
Lips are thin, usually large, squared off teeth, the large eyes, the heavy brow, the receding forehead. I mean, more of the sagittal crest, typical thing. But what's interesting is a lot of them tell me it looked human-like. Didn't look like a gorilla, other than the sheer size of it, the bulk and
the hairiness in it.
The hairy, the muscle. They can see the muscles through the hair. I get that a lot. Massive, anywhere from 7 feet to even 10 footers. We got reports here in Kentucky of some large ones. So they tend to be bulky, strong, massive, flat faces. Not really the prognathism, more flat. Hair mostly around the face, like Patty. The hair comes up under the eyes, so the hair covers a lot of the face. You get that a lot. The difference between Bigfoot and the Dogman, other Dogman reports, the Dogmans tend to be about 6 foot tall, thinner in build, still muscular, but much thinner, not as bulky, more of the extended jaw or snout. Bigfoots that I've documented, they don't see the ears. The ears aren't noticeable. I think just because they're covered with hair, But yeah, a lot of these are human-like. Fact is, there's a report I took of these teenagers would go out on the weekends for joy rides in the country, and they were hungry, and they wanted to go get some food, and they knew a friend of theirs that they said, well, if we go knock on her window to her bedroom, she'll go get us some food. But they said, we can't pull up in her driveway because the dad will shoot us, you know.
Okay.
So they said, let's pull down the dirt road, and we'll walk up to the house and knock on her bedroom window. But they told Jack, the one boy, you stay in the truck. And Jack didn't want to stay in the truck, you know, by himself, because this is a remote, you know, there's no lights. There was a full moon, so you could see pretty clearly.
That's somehow worse sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's kind of creepy. You can see. It was an older truck, so nothing, you know, no electronics, no cell phones back then. So he's by himself in the dark. And they left, and he's sitting there, and he can see across this field, and he sees a figure walking across this field. And he goes, oh man, I hope it doesn't come my way. Please, please. Sure enough, it comes across the field, it gets on the dirt driveway, the dirt road, and starts walking towards his truck. And it's getting larger and larger as it approaches the truck. And when it gets right up in front of the truck, he can see from the moonlight, this was no man. This was a monster covered in hair. And he just laid on the horn. And when he did that, the creature squatted down, took one hand, and was scraping the gravel with one hand, like you would picture a gorilla would do, you know, just kind of. And then Jack, he slid under the steering wheel down on the floor. And when he did that, it got real quiet. So he said, I'm sitting there, I'm shivering. All of a sudden, I hear a smack on the windshield. And I look up, the creature's arm is pressed against the windshield, the entire windshield. He said, I could see the perspiration glistening between the hair from the moonlight, the sweat as it was pressed against the window, the windshield. Then I looked over to the driver's window, and this face took up the entire driver's side window. And he said, oh my gosh, my heart stopped. I you know, this fear, dread just came over me like I've never felt before. But then he said the craziest thing, when I looked into its eyes, it did not look evil. It did not look mean. A sense of calmness came over me. It did say, you know, it looked kind of human-like, had the wide hooded nose, but still covered in hair. And he said this sense of fear went away. He goes, but when it opened its mouth and you could see the saliva spread between the teeth, he goes, then I realized, okay, I had enough. And he reached up and he put his hand on the horn to scare it away. And luckily, it ran off.
Wow. I mean, that's just a terrifying encounter. And I think you must see this. When I talk to witnesses, sometimes you can tell those who've really, really seen something, they're almost traumatized. It's almost a PTSD style recollection every single time of the same event. If there was a street light broken or that was out, or some odd detail that they noticed within the encounter that doesn't make any difference to the story, they'll always repeat it again and again in that same order. And it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me, and those are the kinds of stories that sort of keep me coming for this genre, you know.
Yeah,
there could be a possibility of such discovery. Talking about Bigfoot, you know, of course, the North American Bigfoot, especially that in the US, it's the one that's known all around the world, and people often complain that there's not really enough evidence to support its presence, you know, its existence. What is the best evidence that you've seen for Bigfoot in Kentucky?
Well, in Kentucky, we have one of the largest cast collections of footprints and handprints. A gentleman by the name of Thomas Shea, he's a researcher. He's collected all these casts, happens to be where he lives almost. And Cliff Barackman and Dr. Jeff Meldrum have a copy of these in their collections, and they vouch for them as legit casts from a large, hominid. And, that's a great, piece of evidence there. But then if you add into the vocalizations, which we've captured, I've captured some vocals right there on his property, hair samples that he obtained from that same area, sent it to Dr. Meldrum, and it came back as the gold standard for Sasquatch hair.
Oh,
the real long, coarse, there's no cellular medulla, in the center.
That's right. Yeah.
It matches typical Sasquatch hair found elsewhere that we think is Sasquatch hair. So you add up all this stuff, you add up the tracks, you add up the vocals, which I recorded. You can listen to them on my website. They're amazing. The hair, the dozens of credible eyewitnesses in that area and other areas. We have basically everything but a body.
And as you say, this is part of the forest ninja MO, really, isn't it? That these creatures must, I would assume, have some form of burial, or perhaps even a place that they go to die. Lots of animals do that. And I suppose if they have close family units in the same way that chimps and gorillas may have, that they would indeed perhaps take care of the dead in some way. That makes sense to me. And I know the forest can eat up decaying animals very quickly, but something like a Sasquatch would be seen at some point. It would have happened.
Yeah.
That we've seen a decomposing or recently deceased Sasquatch, if they weren't hiding themselves away or burying the dead. What are your thoughts on that? Is there any witness sighting that sort of corresponds to that family, that familial burial or taking care of the deceased?
Well, I can give you some examples. I've been hiking miles off trail in areas where there's been Bigfoot reports and found large burial mounds of rocks above ground, but larger than what a human would be. And they're obvious to me, burial mounds, but I'm not going to disturb them, out of respect. It could be Native American, it could be what have you, but they're massive. There's other reports. One example was in Kentucky where someone hit one with a vehicle and EMS showed up and ushered everybody away.
Really?
Except a couple of people went around the woods and were watching them dig a large hole, and this big hairy creature, they're pushing it into the hole. And Tom Powell from California, he wrote it in his book, The Locals. He said, "Man, can you guys go back tomorrow and let me know what you see where they buried this creature?" And they go back and it was gone.
Wow.
It was just, It was dug up. So did some of the family of the Bigfoot, did they come retrieve it? Or, does the government know? And is there a government cover up? So we don't know.
What department of the government is EMS? Sorry?
That's emergency, like an ambulance. They tend to accidents and people that are
big disaster things and whatnot. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. A lot of people talk about this government knowledge and bits and pieces like that. I've tried to think for a long time what the purpose of that could be. And I'm not equating it to this in any sense, but somebody recently was talking to me about this flat Earth theory, and I said, what would be the benefit to them of hiding that from us, that the Earth was flat instead of round? I mean, how does it benefit them? It doesn't benefit anybody to make it, something hidden. I wondered about that with the government as well. In what way would it benefit them to hide the presence of this animal from us, instead of, especially with modern day environmental movements being as they are, it would be something beneficial, to perhaps secure more land and usher in this green this green wave of environmental policy. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I kind of think that the government, if they admitted to this, if it's true, then they would have to protect that land, like you say,
Uh-huh.
which I hate to say it's more about money. It's more about progress and not protecting the lands in the United States.
Logging and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So if this creature came out and this creature had feelings and emotions and was human-like, and oh my gosh, we would have to protect everything. And then it's competition for us. Do we build a subdivision with houses or schools, or do we leave the forest for the Bigfoot? And then they're direct competition with us. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is I've got a report in Kentucky at Fort Knox, which is a military base, and it's for all purposes, it's a deathbed confession of them killing 4 Bigfoot on this military base in the woods. And they were taken back and they're debriefed and had to sign non-disclosures, and they had like a protocol in place after they killed these 4 creatures. So if this is something that's happened a few times where they've killed these creatures and that came out that they actually killed them, oh my gosh, nobody would be happy.
I mean, it would definitely would class as a protected, or a species that should be protected, a rare species at least. And I think as many sightings as we have, they're still few and far between, essentially. It's not something that most people see in their everyday life, even when they live in such areas for 50, 60, 70 years. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, what I was, and I've asked somebody else this today, actually, and there's a great sort of cult-like trend around Bigfoot, which is fantastic. I love it. I love the conferences. I love the documentaries, everything that goes with it. But many people think that this is detrimental, to the scientific research of the creature, and then it pushes science away from the subject because I suppose it's a pop culture phenomenon at the same time as an actual discipline. So what are your thoughts on that? Is it good for the subject in that it brings more people to consider it who would never have thought of it before, or it does a new balance need to be struck in order to get a few more scientists on board?
I always think that the commercialization of Bigfoot, the commercials and products, is a good thing. When you see Bigfoot everywhere, and I always joke that when Bigfoot's officially discovered, he's going to want royalties from everybody using his name and likeness everywhere. But no, but I think it's a good thing. The only thing that I think that hurts us are the hoaxes that are out there, the videos that people are constantly hoaxing, and vocals, and I think that hurts us. But I do think we're making more progress with academics coming on board now, supporting the notion that this hominid does exist. There's a lot of well-known ones like Dr. Jeff Meldrum, Jane Goodall. There's a lot of them that support it now. So I think it's gaining more momentum, but nothing's going to matter. I mean, we've got DNA, we've got hair, photos, we've got vocals, casts. It's going to take a body, ultimately.
Dead or alive.
Dead or alive, and then that's going to prove it. But until then, there's too many hoaxes that ruin it.
I think part of that, from my perspective, is that people have. Sometimes I think they're just regular researchers that have given everything to that particular genre, and yet social media has brought on a daily demand for content. And at some point, one or two individuals slide on that slippery slope of producing content, when it's become their one and everything, or their career. But I do believe there's a chance that it could become an animal that's part of the natural order, in the same way as the giant squid was once the kraken of old. And it was silly to think that the 100-foot-long squids lived in the sea somewhere, and yet the body started to wash up. And finally, in the last few years, we obtained not only physical evidence, but evidence of them in their environment. and which is amazing. Who would have thought we could do that? And now you don't think, wow, a kraken. You just think, oh, giant squid. It's the normal part of it is part of the natural order. And I wonder if that could happen to Bigfoot eventually. Will we say, oh yeah, I just went down to the local zoo and saw X, Y, Z, or I went on a Bigfoot tour where there's a local family, or there was a stuffed specimen in the museum that we looked at, and it's just a natural thing, nothing special. 50, 100 years from now, what do you think the chances of that happening in our lifetimes could be?
I think there's a good chance, because, like I said, there's more people on board. There are more researchers now than ever before. There are more cell phones and cameras and drones with thermal imagers. So I think I would hope in our lifetime they would be recognized by science, and then we could protect them. I don't want one in a cage, but I would like to protect their habitat and maybe study them in a humane way, learn from them. There's probably a lot we can learn from them. But
I'm sure.
Yeah, so I do hope that that's the case. And I tell people this: the human race is like a speck of sand on all the beaches in the world in terms of time. They think we've been here forever. We haven't. And we've overlapped other hominids. Like there's been 7 different hominids in the last 50,000 years. 7 different hominids, including us. Some of us we interbred with. Like we just learned we bred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. We have that DNA in us. We just learned that. We don't know everything. We're learning more about the different hominids and the structure. And I believe Bigfoot's another one of those, a relic hominid there's too many reports from credible witnesses.
Oh yeah.
All
around the world.
Yeah, everywhere. And it's funny I say everywhere, and I always bring this up about the people that get into the woo, or the Bigfoot can cloak and go through portals, which maybe it does. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I bring up the point that in Hawaii, there are no Bigfoots, okay? No Bigfoot reports, because Hawaii was formed by a volcano. It wasn't part of Pangea of all the continents when they were connected. Now, when all the continents were connected, it was easy for animals to move around and disperse. And when the continents separated, then you had the animals and people were dispersed everywhere. So I really think that I hope that in our lifetime it's recognized by science, so we can say I told you so.
I would, yeah, I would love that. I think that would be amazing. You mentioned Hawaii actually, and there is the story of the Menehune, of course, but I investigate that a little bit. For all intents and purposes, they seem to be a pygmy people of a sort. At least people appear to be pygmies to the large Tahitians who took over. And I think they even appear on a census or something in the 1800s.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, so I don't know how many people were said to be Menehune at that point. A lot of people think they're the previous inhabitants of the island, who were just basically taken over by the big, strong Tahitians and became like a suborder of people. Talking about the woo and the paranormal thing, and you mentioned that comes up a lot, and I always say to people, look, as a researcher, I'm looking for animals. If something is supernatural or paranormal, it's outside of my remit. That's not to say that there isn't some crossover where it's debatable what the thing is exactly, but generally speaking, once it's outside of the zoological paradigm, it's outside of my remit. I'm no longer interested. But I've had a theory for a long time that the reason we sometimes imagine that these creatures have supernatural powers is because we can't find them, and they can hide well in the forest, and their fur with all these different greys and browns and beigey sort of strips all over the place is perfect camouflage.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's something of our ego saying, well, yeah, I couldn't find it for the last 40 years, but I've come to the conclusion it's a supernatural creature. Yeah. I wonder if there's a psychological element in play there.
Yeah, it could be. Lauren Coleman mentioned we should not answer one unknown with another
Yeah,
unknown, you know.
exactly.
And if you look at animals, you could look at cryptid coloration, which we know animals, there's a lot of animals like chameleon and other animals that blend in, even change color
Yeah.
to their environment. And if you look at their hair, I have an example of one in Kentucky where some boys were fishing and a large branch broke from a sycamore tree with a Bigfoot creature on the branch, fell into the river. And the boys jumped up from the dock, ran around the woods, and watched this, it was a white Bigfoot actually, swim arm over arm.
Uh-huh.
And then it pulled itself up by a branch, got up on the bank, and ran off. And they said during that report, the hair looked dry. The hair
Huh.
was blowing in the wind.
Okay.
So maybe it has some properties, oils, and maybe it's
Hmm.
hollow. It could refract light, or or absorb light.
Translucence. Yeah.
Yeah, there could be some
Yeah,
weird properties to
absolutely.
their hair that
Yeah.
they have learned or adapted, to help them blend in.
Makes sense to me. Absolutely makes sense to me. And as far as infrasound and, as you say, this alleged cloaking again could be part of the translucences concerned, even if, and we don't have an example of that in any other primate, but even if they were able somehow to change color, well, the first person that ever dived below the ocean and watched an octopus mask itself against a rock, not only imitating the shape but the actual colors, must have thought that was a magical power of some kind.
Yeah.
We know it's not a magical power now. We understand exactly how it works,
Right.
and yet that's an amazing thing. Um, who knows what attributes these creatures could have? Again, lots of get out of jail free cards, Charlie. But there you go.
Yeah.
Um, just to wrap up, I just wanted to spend the last segment talking about the mission of the Kentucky Bigfoot Organization. What are you guys planning? What are you up to? And what do you hope to achieve as an organization? How can people get involved?
Um, I would love to establish laws to protect them in Kentucky. And I mentioned that when I give my presentations, and
Hmm.
I've had people raise their hands. Why do you need to protect them? They're doing just fine. I said, well, they are, but their habitat is not. Their habitat is dwindling. Deforestation, urban sprawl, logging. They're they can't reproduce pretty soon. I mean, they're going to be landlocked in certain areas. They can't hop on the freeway and drive to another state to find a mate. So there's only so much inbreeding you can do where they're not going to be able to reproduce, and the numbers are going to dwindle. So if I can establish laws to protect them and then protect the forest where I know they're at, I've got some spots in Kentucky. I'm 100% sure I've got too many credible witnesses. I've got more just the other day from the same area, from people that were driving through Kentucky, had a sighting. They had no idea about all the sightings I have there. And I just add that to my database. And
Wow.
if I get to the point, maybe before I die, I want to go to the officials in this area and say, here are all my reports,
Mm.
all my interactions. I want you to take this serious. I want to do a full investigation and maybe establish laws to protect them.
Wow.
Um, it's tricky because some of these places are state or national parks,
Uh-huh.
and they don't want that stigma or that attention from a large creature that could kill people. Although I
Mm.
don't think they do, but they don't want to embrace it. So I'm worried I'll get a lot of pushback if I approach them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, some people have suggested something like that here as well for the big cats in the UK, and that there are so many reports. I mean, the thousands of reports now that there's some sort of ongoing denial of their presence, because if they acknowledged they were here, they would have to do something about it, in a sense of mop up the problem, or at least make laws to protect them, because we do believe that they've become third, fourth, fifth, even generation in this country now since the 1970s. Maybe that's something similar with the US as well. Also here, it's very difficult to get laws enacted. And first, you need a petition with 100,000 signatures before it's debated in Parliament. And then if Parliament say, yeah, okay, let's vote on that, they vote ahead, it goes to the House of Lords. And if they like it, perhaps, maybe, it would come into place. And of course, most countries that you can't protect something in law that has not been proven to exist.
Right.
That's that's the issue. That's the issue. I'm not sure how it works in the US as well. So just very quickly to wrap up, thank you for spending the time with me today, and it's great to catch up again on all your work. Just tell people where they can get in touch with you and how they can get involved.
The easiest way is through our website, KentuckyBigfoot.com. And then the Facebook, we use social media a lot. That's a good way through Facebook and Instagram to share reports, share evidence you may have found, not only in Kentucky, but elsewhere. I've taken reports in other states, other countries. I've taken reports. So if you have a report that nobody else believes, I'm all ears. I want to hear it just as you do. And that's one of the things I enjoy doing. I enjoy interviewing witnesses, and I get to live vicariously through them.
Yeah.
So submit your report. Come to one of our expeditions and get out in the woods with us. That's always fun. We have a great time. And we hope, hopefully soon we'll go visit the UK there.
Oh, yes.
And my wife's family's there still.
Exactly. If you come by, we'll definitely take you out to a few places, a few lovely haunts around, where allegedly, just in the very same way as I receive US Bigfoot reports, they seem to be reporting very similar creatures, albeit on a smaller scale, it seems. But yeah, strange. Woodwoes, that's the old name in the UK for those hairy creatures that people believed inhabited the island, in the medieval period. Who knows? I won't keep any longer. Charlie, thank you so much for joining me today. And I suggest everybody gets out there and logs on. And there's merch. There's Kentucky Bigfoot Organization merch, which I would be wearing if it wasn't so cold at the moment. You'd see my T-shirt. And get involved. Charlie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.